"Don't move!" The words weren't shouted, but the weight behind them froze the air. A boy, no older than 11, stood clutching a bag of bread. His dark skin made him the target. His hunger, the crime. Outside, stones rattled against broken glass as voices jeered, "Thieves! Parasites!" Fear rippled through the room of children huddled in silence, their sanctuary under siege. But this moment was only the surface of a much deeper truth, a truth about wealth, race, and what it really means to be human. This is the story of a millionaire who followed a boy. Comment your city below. It was the kind of morning most people would pass without a second thought. But for Samuel Carter, every detail mattered. He was a man the world called a millionaire, someone who wore tailored suits, carried a spotless reputation, and lived in a mansion on the hill that overlooked the city below. His life was defined by routine, stock market updates with his morning coffee, business calls that filled the day, and dinners so extravagant they seemed to float above reality. To outsiders, Samuel had it all: wealth, influence, and a life untouched by hardship. Yet even from the heights of his polished world, something began to disturb his carefully constructed order. On his daily route through the heart of the city, Samuel started noticing a boy. The boy couldn't have been more than 10 or 11, with dark skin that seemed to stand out even more against the city's indifference. His clothes were worn thin, his shoes mismatched, and his eyes carried a weight no child should bear. But what caught Samuel's attention was not the boy's appearance, it was his request. Always the same, always simple: food. He never begged for money, never asked for favors, only food. Samuel would watch from behind the tinted glass of his car as the boy approached strangers with a quiet urgency. Most brushed him aside. Some looked at him with disdain, as though his skin and poverty were marks of shame. Others ignored him entirely, walking past like he was invisible. Each rejection left a mark that Samuel could not shake, though he told himself it was not his concern. But day after day, the scene repeated itself. The same boy, the same plea, and each time Samuel found it harder to look away. Something about the child's persistence gnawed at him. Why food? Why always food? Why not money? Like every other beggar he had seen on the streets. The question lingered like an echo Samuel could not silence. On the surface, life carried on as usual. Samuel's board meetings were filled with numbers and projections, his evenings with glittering parties that celebrated his wealth. But when the laughter faded and the champagne glasses emptied, the image of that boy remained. It haunted him in the quiet moments, like a shadow that followed no matter how far he tried to outrun it. Samuel's world of marble floors and glass walls began to feel hollow. For the first time in years, he found himself restless, his mind circling back to that same street corner where hunger and survival met in the form of a child's plea. He tried to dismiss it. After all, what was one boy in a city filled with countless others struggling to survive? But deep down, Samuel knew there was something different here, something that pulled at him, refusing to let go. And though he didn't realize it yet, that boy was about to shatter the very foundation of Samuel's perfect world. The days stretched on, and Samuel Carter found himself looking for the boy even when he didn't mean to. It was as if the city itself had shifted, no longer just traffic, buildings, and noise, but a stage where this single child's struggle played out again and again. Each encounter unsettled Samuel more than the last. The boy's voice was never loud, but it carried. "Food, please." He spoke it with a kind of dignity, never begging, never lowering his eyes. And yet the responses were crueler than Samuel could bear. A man in a pressed suit snapped, "Get a job!" A woman clutched her purse tighter and crossed the street. A group of teenagers laughed, tossing an empty wrapper at his feet as though hunger itself were something to mock. Samuel remained in the shadows, watching. And with each rejection, something inside him twisted. He thought of the countless meals wasted at his parties, the untouched dishes whisked away without a second glance. The contrast was unbearable. One afternoon, he decided to test his own assumptions. He had his driver stop at the corner where the boy stood. Samuel expected the child to run up, eager for a handout, but the boy didn't. He stood quietly, watching the car with cautious eyes. his small frame tense. When Samuel rolled down the window and offered money, the boy shook his head. "Food," he whispered again. That single word sent a chill through Samuel. He pushed the money closer, but the boy stepped back, refusing. Confusion rattled him. Who rejects money when they are starving? The days that followed only deepened the mystery. Samuel's obsession grew. He canceled meetings just to drive through that same street, waiting for the boy to appear. And every time he did, Samuel noticed the way others treated him, not just with indifference, but with suspicion. Security guards watched him more closely than the businessmen in expensive coats. Store owners shooed him away before he even reached their doors. His skin, Samuel realized, made him a suspect before he even opened his mouth. It wasn't just hunger the boy was fighting. It was the weight of a world stacked against him. One evening, Samuel witnessed something that burned into his memory. A police officer cornered the boy near a convenience store, his hand resting on his holster. The child's hand shook as he held up an apple, barely bitten. His voice cracked as he tried to explain, but the officer's face was stone. Passers-by muttered, "Thief! Criminal!" No one saw a child. No one saw hunger. They only saw skin. Samuel's heart pounded. He stepped out of his car, his presence alone enough to change the officer's tone. In an instant, the boy was released, dismissed like an inconvenience, but the damage was done. Samuel saw the fear in the boy's eyes, the kind that lingers long after the danger passes. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He replayed the moment over and over. The world had decided the boy was guilty before hearing a word. If he hadn't intervened, what would have happened? The next day, Samuel followed the boy from a distance. The child's path wound through alleys and back streets, away from the polished sidewalks Samuel was used to. He trailed him past crumbling brick walls and shattered windows, places where the city forgot to care. At every turn, Samuel expected the boy to reveal some hidden motive. Perhaps he sold the food or traded it for money. But nothing came. The boy clutched each meal with care, guarding it like treasure. And still, he never ate in front of Samuel. Not once. The mystery gnawed at him, pulling him deeper into a world he had never known. He noticed the small gestures. The way the boy's shoulders tightened when strangers stared. The way he stood taller when insulted, refusing to crumble. Strength lived in him, even in hunger. And with each step Samuel took, the question grew louder. Why food? Why never money? As the sun dipped low, the boy vanished into a narrow alley. Samuel hesitated. His world had always been safe, controlled, predictable, but something urged him forward. The answer lay beyond the shadows, waiting, and Samuel knew, once he saw it, there would be no going back. The night Samuel finally chose to follow the boy deeper into the city, his world shifted forever. The streets narrowed, the glow of neon lights giving way to shadows that stretched endlessly. Samuel's polished shoes echoed on cracked pavement as he trailed behind, careful not to be seen. The boy clutched a small bag of bread and fruit he had managed to gather, his steps steady but urgent, as if time itself was pressing against him. Samuel's heart pounded. Every instinct told him to turn back, to retreat into the safety of privilege. But something stronger pulled him forward. He needed to know. The boy stopped before a broken building, its windows shattered, its walls painted with graffiti and scars of neglect. For a moment, Samuel thought he had discovered the truth. Surely this was the lair of a scam, the place where stolen food was traded for cash or worse. But then the boy slipped inside and Samuel followed, holding his breath. What he saw froze him in place. Inside, the darkness gave way to a dim flicker of light. Dozens of small faces looked up, children thin and frail, their eyes wide with hunger. They sat on torn blankets, their hands folded tightly in their laps as if waiting for something sacred. And then Samuel understood. The boy was not feeding himself. He was feeding them. Piece by piece, the boy unwrapped the food and passed it around. A crust of bread here, a slice of fruit there. He smiled as he handed it out, though his own stomach growled in silence. Each child's eyes lit up at the smallest bite, as though it were a feast. Samuel's chest tightened. He had prepared himself to witness poverty. He had not prepared himself to witness greatness, but the moment was not his alone. Outside, voices rose, angry, accusing. A group of men shouted through the cracked windows, their words laced with venom. "Thieves! Parasites! You people don't belong here!" Stones rattled against the walls. Fear swept through the room, children clinging to each other, their fragile sanctuary under attack. Samuel pressed himself against the wall, torn between safety and action. For the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of what it meant to be unseen, unwanted, and unprotected. And he wasn't the one carrying it. The boy was. In that single harrowing moment, Samuel's fortune, his titles, his world, all of it seemed worthless against the reality before him. The truth stood raw and undeniable. Racism had built walls around innocence, trapping children in hunger while the world outside hurled stones, and Samuel realized he had been blind all along. Dear audience, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. The room fell silent again after the voices outside faded, leaving only the sound of children chewing their meager pieces of bread. Samuel stood frozen in the shadows, unable to reconcile what he had just witnessed. He had followed the boy, expecting to uncover a lie, but instead he discovered a truth so powerful it shattered the walls of his carefully curated life. The millionaire who had lived among marble floors and glittering chandeliers now saw more dignity in a cracked building filled with hungry children than in any boardroom he had ever entered. For the first time, he realized that wealth was not measured in currency but in compassion, and this boy, this child the world dismissed, carried a fortune far greater than his own. Samuel stepped outside that night with trembling hands. The city looked different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. Every face he passed, every cold glance cast at the boy earlier, echoed with a truth he could no longer ignore. Racism had starved not only stomachs, but entire generations of opportunity. It had stolen dignity, silenced voices, and forced children into shadows where only survival mattered. And yet amid the injustice, there was resilience. The boy's act of giving was a rebellion against the cruelty of the world. He refused to let hunger, poverty, and prejudice define him. He chose to share what little he had. In that choice, Samuel saw a courage he had never possessed. Despite all his wealth, the impact was irreversible. Samuel's life would never return to its hollow comforts. He would carry the memory of those children, their thin hands reaching for bread, their eyes lighting up with gratitude, as a constant reminder of what true wealth really meant. He knew he could no longer sit in silence, insulated by privilege, while injustice continued. But this story is not only about Samuel. It is about us, about the millions of children across the world whose hunger is ignored because of the color of their skin, about the subtle ways society chooses who is worthy of help and who is cast aside, and about how easy it is to look away until the truth forces itself into view. The question remains, how many more children must go hungry? How many more voices must be silenced before we finally see them? Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And before you go, tell us, what does true wealth mean to you?